Okay, thank you. And I'd like to thank the Planning Committee for inviting me to speak today. I am, as Veronique said, an OB/GYN faculty member and clinical researcher as well, but I am going to talk today about the perspective that we've taken at Duke, particularly how to address issues in reproducibility. And particularly, I think, from the standpoint of an institution, we're really talking about transparency and education and how we can move some of the initiatives forward that a lot of folks have talked about already. So as we know, there are always things that we would hope, as has been stated before, that people will do the right thing, that they know the right thing, that they understand how to do it, that it's not difficult to do. But as with anything, there are often times where things go wrong. And really, what is at stake, particularly for the individual, for the researcher, for the institution? So at the worst case scenario is if we had any sort of harm to research participants that were involved in trials where there were either mistakes all the way ranging to a deliberate misconduct. There certainly are implications for loss of research funding. And then we go into some of the issues that were talked about earlier, which is data loss and publication retraction. But we also know in our experiences, and I know that Duke is not alone, that we tend to have issues of inability to recruit top faculty and students when we have missteps along this sort of path in research. We have a loss of confidence from our sponsors, and that doesn't mean only with our federal sponsors, but even foundation sponsors and even our community sponsors and philanthropists. And so in all of that puts together a context of a loss of public trust. And we know that the field of science has been suffering overall, not just in this research misconduct space, in this area. And there have been lots of initiatives to put back forth this trust in science. And I think we're all working towards that, but it is something that we take very seriously at our institution. So there's nothing like a burning platform, right, to help us move things along. And we have had recent experiences with misconduct at Duke. I suspect that people are very familiar with the omics case that has been published in many journals and in many news articles and so forth. We actually run a 3 to 4 hour workshop on the case itself because despite the fact many people in this room know about it, given when it occurred, there are many individuals at our institution that don't know about it. Trainees don't know about it. The junior faculty don't know about it. If they don't know the cancer biology world or the field of clinical trials, they're unaware of it. So we find something new every time we talk about this. But our sort of more recent burning platform was our whistleblower case that has been in the news very recently. But the interesting part I'll show you is that in the timeline of occurrence, they both happened simultaneously. We're really only hearing about the impact of our recent case because of the timeline for investigation, for evaluation, and for moving forth, particularly in a court case, of how that can impact. And those are real numbers, in case anyone thought I made a mistake. So we have talked a lot earlier, and it seems to be a very common thread in all of the presentations and Q&A sessions that we've had so far, is that we're really talking about serious cultural changes. We can put forth all the tools and resources that we want to be there and that we want to provide for our investigators, our faculty, our trainees. But at the end of the day, if people don't buy in to the need for change, then we're really going to be struggling to ever move it forward in a systematic way across our institutions, across industry, across the research endeavors for our country and worldwide. So we have put forth, and this is a slide that I use and repeatedly in presentations that I give, about what we think of as the principles of a culture of integrity in our area. And we really work to make sure that we're inclusive, that we're thinking of stakeholders across the research entity and how they need to participate in this process. How can we make this a comprehensive approach? If we provide one thing in education, how are we making sure we're balancing that with oversight and accountability? We have to think of this as multifaceted. It has to be across all dimensions of research and research integrity. We certainly know that the clinical research space, which I work in myself, has been heavily regulated and has allowed investigators to rely on that regulation, even though we complain about it, to safeguard us from a lot of things that we can do. But we have to be moving this forward into all our fields in biomedical research. We have to be pragmatic, right? People are not going to pick up tools and resources and things, and so I commend the presentation earlier that can really demonstrate how we could make this easier to generate often 50 to 100 page research protocol that people are copying and pasting from Word documents over and over again. But at the end of the day, one of the things we've really worked hard to do is think about how we can empower our research community. That's stakeholders at the top, all the way down to the graduate student, the volunteer student, the postdoc, and how we can get them into a setting of what we call a speak-up culture. In the clinical space, not the research space, but in the clinical space, I'd say 25 years ago or so, when we had medication errors, we worked really hard to correct the issue, but we didn't really talk about them. And now we actually incentivize our trainees in the graduate medical education to report safety events. They actually get credit for the number that they report. So we need to get to a space in research and research integrity where that's the same thing. You're not tattletaling on somebody, you're trying to safeguard and help everyone who's part of that community. So we formed a specific office at our institution called the Office of Scientific Integrity, and we have a lot of things going on in this space, but some of our key areas are really focused on education and resources that we think about how to translate the principles that we're all talking about into action on a day-to-day basis. How can we standardize data management practices? What can we do for responsible conduct of research training? And a lot of our federal sponsors require RCR education for trainees or junior investigators, say on a career development award. We actually now require this for all individuals at Duke engaged in research. And that sounds like, okay, that's great. That's actually over 7,000 people that we now require to do a pretty interactive training on a regular basis. We've implemented pretty significant quality management strategies in the clinical research space and are moving towards that into the preclinical space as well. And then we've formed an incident response group or committee that deals with all the other things that are not research misconduct. As someone said earlier, most of the things that are happening are not actually intentional. There certainly are. Those misconduct cases that I mentioned before certainly were intentional acts. But the majority of what we go through churn every day are not actually that. They're missteps, they're unawareness, they're lack of resources. So we address those in a systematic way and try to learn from them. So taking from a paper that Arturo published earlier, we have sort of moved from what we call the foundational principles and initiatives for rigor, reproducibility, transparency, and put those into 4 areas: education and training, what we call best practice, culture and accountability, and scientific and analytical excellence. And I'm just going to show you a few of the things that we're doing in these areas. So in the education and training, I mentioned that we have an RCR program for all of our faculty, staff, and administrators. And we actually utilize some things in the rigor, quality, and reproducibility space in that education as well. We have worked to try to support and promote an open dialogue on integrity through interactive workshops and monthly town halls. When I proposed this at first, people said, oh, people are not going to come to listen to some dry, boring sort of topic that are more about compliance or requirements or standards. We actually have to cap the registration. And so it's really picked up and has become a sounding discussion space for people to come forth with lots of ideas and concerns as well. We really work to provide resources at the trainee and unit level learning perspective. I don't think we can rely any longer on the idea of one more electronic module to check a box that someone is now knows exactly how to do it and is going to be compliant. We have developed things like interactive games for our graduate and postdoctoral students to do. Specifically, we have one on rigor and reproducibility. We have developed an RCR and RQR toolbox, which essentially means that you could take the materials that has almost like a journal club, has a Q&A that goes along with it that you can run in your own lab. And we hope that this is doing things to help empower that investigator with their lab and their trainees. With this, from the standpoint of best practices, we have implemented electronic research notebooks in the preclinical space, and this is a centralized, auditable system. We implemented it full rollout in January, and we have now over 1,000 users, about 700 who actively use it, which means they're logging in on more than a weekly basis. And we meet with them to help them set their templates up, set up their notebooks, use best practices to move forward to other labs. We have implemented some requirements on data management strategies that all labs and research spaces have to have a data management plan and have put in place a process to audit that over the next years. And we've required use for our statistical core by any of our trainees so that we ensure that they have adequate statistical support and aren't just going to a website to click in some numbers and put into a box. From the standpoint of scientific and analytical excellence, we centrally review our shared resources in core labs. We have performed a systematic review, or continue to, of what we call our high-risk, high-profile areas. So when we have investigator-initiated studies that are first in human or in a rare disease, if we have areas where the institution has particular conflict of interest, such as IP or equity, we have external advisors to provide reviews on those research programs on a regular basis. And we've implemented a quality monitoring process for any investigator-initiated clinical research. For anyone in the room who has done industry-sponsored or, say, FDA-regulated trials, we got very used to, or we're very used to having external monitors come in every 6 to 8 weeks to review the data. I suddenly said, why are we going to the extreme of reviewing data externally every 6 to 8 weeks, but if I have an R01 that's funded, no one looks at that at all? I can just do it, I can analyze it, I can submit my progress reports, I can submit my papers. So we have implemented a risk-based monitoring program as well for our investigator-initiated studies. And lastly, I spoke a little bit already on this idea of culture and accountability. In addition to the Empowering Community series that we're doing, we also have established what we call SCAPs, or Scientific Culture and Accountability Plans. These are plans that every department, center, institute have to ensure that all of their faculty and staff have reviewed it and are aware of it, and if there are any changes, they have to do that again. We have worked to coordinate compliance and oversight units so that people don't feel like they're getting pinged from every which way. Someone else is reviewing me. Someone else is trying to ask me why I'm doing this, why am I ordering this, what do I need? So that, again, we have regular communication and investigators feel that this is a helpful service rather than a big brother watching them to figure out what they're doing. And I mentioned also how we established our sort of review and resolution mechanisms as well. So we feel that that is at least a somewhat of comprehensive review of those areas that I mentioned, and a lot of that information is on our website as well. And so I'm hopefully happy to take things when we go into Q&A. So.